Hi, everyone. Thanks for holding on. Apologies for the technical problems in the last session, which is a great shame because it was a great presentation. We are now in the takeaway session, and I'm very pleased that Dr. Chris Holmes from IDC, the Managing Director of Insights Asia Pacific, and Stephanie Krishnan, who is the Associate Consultant at IDC for Insights as well, Asia Pacific. We have unfortunately lost two other panelists, but nevertheless, let's proceed with the wrap up. Over the last 2 days, we have heard many views on industry changes, the challenges in our environment, the potential solutions offered through various approaches, robotics, software, people, transformation, etc., etc. It's been a very, very interesting discussion. So I'd really like to wrap up the 2 days by asking our panelists two fundamental questions. What are your takeaways that you feel the conference has inspired your call to action, in particular, looking at the outlooks for 2022? And the second question I think is very important for all of us to digest is, people has been a big feature around our discussions over the last couple of days around AI, robotics, driving change, and so on and so forth. So in your view, Chris and Stephanie, what are the priorities and dynamics you feel are critical to shape the future of our industry? So, I mean, let's take the first question in sequence. So maybe ladies first, Steph, what do you think are the key takeaways you feel the conference has inspired call to action? In particular, looking at what 2022 brings on the horizon?
I think one of the key messages, and I'm going to borrow the phrase that Michelle Chan, the MP that joined us at the beginning, started with, which is disrupt ourselves. It is something that the supply chain community is quite good at. We are known for being disruptors or adapters, I should say, when it comes to dealing with changes. But I think that rate of disruption and the rate of change that has been coming over the last 3 to 5 years has been accelerating, and it's something that we're going to have to learn to do with. And I think in order to scale and maintain profitability and deal with things like the Great Resignation, we are going to have to learn how to disrupt ourselves better and realize that the same way that we've been doing things is not good enough. And along lines with that, we were that point about flexibility. We're hearing a lot about integration, and this is not just about data integration. There has been a lot of emphasis on the digital capabilities, because we are seeing, in the last 2 to 5 years, we are seeing capabilities that enable some of the visions that we've been dreaming about for the last 20 to 30 years. I mean, I've been talking on these panels for a while, and we've been talking about all this, and we've really started to see that technology come to the fore that actually delivers on that digital promise, which I think was a theme we had for LogiSYM a couple of years ago. But beyond that digital capability is looking at realizing that the collaboration has to go more than skin deep. It has to be something that benefits the entire supply chain. And I think the integration of the people and the process part is really going to come to the fore, especially as we heard earlier today with the sustainability aspect, right? And I think that's going to drive a lot as well. So, to start with, I would say, we do need to disrupt ourselves. We do need to build in that flexibility and adaptability, and we do need to integrate and not just look at data integration, but people, process, and planet effectively.
So your calls to action, Steph, for 2022, I mean, if you had to just give us a couple of high level, what would they be?
I think there's going to be an increased focus on supply risk. So looking at the strategic aspects of how we manage supply, but also looking at how we balance that with data. So if you're going to look at something, I would look at getting your data in place and either start looking at having de facto control towers or looking at supply chain control towers that allow you to start to get some insight there. That's going to bode well, I think, for not just being able to see into tier 1, tier 2 vendors, but also to start to build on what we think will be coming with the sustainability side of things. So yeah, that if I was going to say that's a first step, that would be it. Okay,
great. Thanks, Steph. Chris, from your view, obviously you see things from a different angle. You're on the manufacturing side, but you see the bigger picture. How do you see it from your perspective?
So I mean, one of my key takeaways, and I think it was something that was highlighted across a number of the panels, and again, it may sound a little bit simple, but I think we've just got to get out there and do it. I think we need to shift focus onto the implementation. I think one of the things we've seen over the past 18 months is that we have gone through a period of disruption, and we've actually been able to make decisions extremely quickly and actually implement new things because we had to, just to keep the business running. But we're also starting to sort of see and starting to feel that all that sort of acceleration in decision making, we're starting to lose and go back into the old ways of, let's do the old ROI analysis. We take 6 months to sort of plan it, and we go through the whole justification exercise, and it's too long. I think we've got to get back, maybe not to the way some of the decisions were made, at the start of the pandemic, but we've got to actually get in there and really start implementing, starting to actually, and the term sandbox has been used, starting to explore what we can actually do with all the data and use of all the new technologies. So I think that's one thing. And the other thing, and I was thinking about this, after yesterday and also this morning, I also think that it was also brought out by a couple of the speakers yesterday, we've also got to be brave, and we've actually got to challenge that status quo. And by that I mean, we've been talking a lot about breaking down silos. We've been talking about sort of operating in the traditional ways that we have been operating for the past X years. But I think as we start to think around some of these newer technologies, and we start to bring in some of the data, and we think about, actually, let's look at how decisions are made across our organization and organize in that manner rather than trying to shoehorn to existing sort of structures. I think that's also where we're going to start to see a shift and start to see some of these leading thinkers and leading innovators actually move in that direction. So I think it's going to be a very exciting year, because it's going to be those that are going to be at the forefront of this sort of next wave. And again, we've been told not to use the word transformation, but that next wave of change, whatever we want to call it. And it's going to be those that innovate fast, and also those that actually challenge the status quo in terms of their organization.
Chris, that's very interesting. And as you said just a moment ago, during the last couple of years, we've been forced into change because of necessity, because of survival mode. Hopefully next year we won't be forced into decision making because of crisis or because of disruption. But apart from the drivers you're talking about, exploring, trying new things, adopting new technologies, being brave is also very courageous in terms of approaching these challenges. But aren't we going to come up against the mindset again, a fixed mindset where people are going to fall back into ROI, are going to fall back into numbers, are going to fall back into the traditional way of doing it, because that's the comfort zone? How do we try and avoid going back into those bad habits, if you like?
Yeah, and again, I think that's the biggest challenge. I mean, I think I mentioned yesterday, I mean, one of the things we have seen is that pretty much everyone's got some form of roadmap in place. There is some form of vision as to where we want to go, and we're moving towards that. But the problem is actually getting that mindset and the skills in place to actually deliver that. And in fact, right, Steph and I were just having a conversation earlier on today. And I think one of the key things is really going to be around getting those people in place. And it's those people, dare I say it, who have the experience with the grey hair, but also that excitement over what the newer technologies can actually offer, and can marry those together. And that's going to be the key thing going forward. I mean, I think Scott Phillips said yesterday, if you're not interested in analytics and you're not interested in looking at the data and trying to understand the story the data is going to tell you, you've got no part of our organization going forward. And that type of mindset is going to be key going forward. And again, I think it's also very interesting, some of the research we've been conducting is that we're now starting to see that, if you like, digital innovative companies attract more staff to come and join them. They also see less turnover. And so you've got to try and think about getting into that sphere where you're actually seen as somewhere I want to go. I'm going to be using the latest tech, because that's going to actually if you like, stem some of this great resignation and workers leaving, etc. And so this is going to be one of those things that there's going to be those organizations that do that and succeed and can portray themselves as being advanced and thinking, you know, and they're going to start to accelerate away from those that don't.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. So which in fact is leads into the second question about people. And again, it's people. No matter how much robotics or AI you have, people are still fundamentally vital to what we're doing. So Steph, coming back again to how do we shape the industry for the future? And again, we talked about courage. We talked about mindset change. We talked about yesterday about the C-suite being potentially obstacles to change. What do we need to do now? I mean, how do we get through to organizations that C-suite are in fact, some of the C-suite functions are actually sandbagging some of these changes or are impediments to changes? How do we try and break this mold? Because mindset it's critical, but how do we go about chipping away at this?
Yeah. So I mean, it's also not so much about who or how will we change this. There is starting to already be a digital divide. So some of the research that IDC has done has actually linked digital transformation to profitability and revenue outcomes. Now, during COVID-19 in 2019 and 2020, we started to see that those that didn't have the digital initiatives or weren't starting the digital journey were actually, you know, suffering chronic losses compared to their digital counterparts, right? If organizations don't do this, they're going to be falling short anyway, right? So it's you know, there's a phrase in there which is true, you know, who's going to bell the cat? I mean, the market is going to bell the cat, because there will be loss of profits and you know, loss of capability, you'll lose your ecosystem because you're not competitive. You know, it is going to have a knock-on effect, and there is already starting to be that digital divide. Now, in terms of how do we build up those capabilities moving forward, you know, organizations are going to have to start experimenting, have to start failing fast. There are incentives out there from governments, and you know, it is worth taking up those incentives and looking at, you know, the digitalization, you know, where the digitalization emphasis is at a national level, and how you can actually turn that into something that's going to help, you know, maybe tie to some of those more old metrics that we're talking about with the ROI. But then we also need to look at newer metrics. So looking at things like the innovation rate, looking at, you know, what sort of conversion do we have in digitalizing our processes or automating our processes? You know, dealing with the great resignation and dealing with loss of workers. And those loss of workers is not necessarily because workers are just going away. It's because organizations are moving on and they're having trouble acquiring workers with the skills that are needed for the future, right? Yeah. And this is where you know, people talk about we don't have enough workers. It's we don't have enough workers for those capabilities. And we either need to make that traditional manufacturing make or buy decision. Do we make those workers in-house, i.e. do we skill them? Or do we look at paying the extra salary that's going to take to acquire them so that they can then come into the organization and hopefully reskill? So there's a few dynamics there, but I think it's going to be interesting to see organizations try and change their own mindsets in order to deal with the fact that they might lose customers if they don't go there.
You talked about new matrix measurements. Give us an example of what these new matrices could be. I mean, how are they easy to apply? Are they complex? What do you have in mind?
Well, you know, some of the simple ones is actually you look at your utilization rate of systems that you're implementing, right? So when you actually put in digital technologies, are you using them? And if not, then how do you then train people to actually go ahead and use them further so that you are getting that usage? I mean, you know, we talk about how technology implementations fail, but, you know, looking at technologies that actually have, you know, like I was looking at one the other day where they actually have the training that is in real time as you use the technology. You know, you don't need that extra training or the extra training programs, because ultimately organizations are not investing in it, and that's where a lot of failure is happening. So being able to you know, buy smart technology and then look at measuring how that technology is actually being used. Another area we're looking at is innovation rate. So how rapidly organizations are actually innovating, and it could be innovating from not just a product perspective, but also looking at the processes that they're doing. Another other area that I look at is when we're actually looking at investing. You know, a lot of the time organizations like have one technology, one use, right? And they're looking to replace one for one. And realistically, and this is something that we heard with Samsung yesterday, and we heard it with a couple of others, is that you need to invest in a tool that's going to allow you to scale use cases. So you can say, okay, the first one is this, but then we're going to be able to use it for this, and we're going to be able to use it for something else. And scaling that technology investment and designing your roadmap so that you can do that is actually going to make more traditional metrics like ROI kind of make sense in the long term, but, you know, potentially looking at how you're going to leverage that over that time.
Yeah. Okay, that's great. So Chris, we touched on this yesterday as well. I mean, Steph talked about a number of issues, the economic impact, the scalability of capabilities, the transformational capabilities, digital matrix, etc. But it all comes down to the ownership and leadership. And that's one of the areas that is, so for example, you don't have to be in a C-suite to own some of these new matrices. You don't have to be in a C-suite to actually understand the digital divide. You don't have to be in a C-suite to actually understand the mismatch of capabilities. How do you reconcile the need for ownership in these new dynamics and the leadership to drive that and to actually build that courage in the organization?
Yeah, and I mean, it's a great point, Joe. I think it's, you know, we all say it starts from the top. When people start to talk about how they can actually move forward and drive that change, and it has to come from that mandate from the top. And it's quite interesting because we also do see that you end up with this, you know, there's a top level mandate that we're going to drive change, but then it sort of gets blocked to sort of in the mid tier of the organization, but the workers at the bottom also want this change. And so it's one thing saying it, but then it's actually got to be driven down through the organization. And I think I said yesterday in the panel, you know, one of the basic things we've seen is getting that taxonomy in place, but also starting to get the ownership as to who's actually got the drive and who's got the mandate to push this through, because it's, you know, change is uncomfortable. It's, you know, it's you're going to be doing something different, so there's a slight fear about it, etc. I mean, we've all been through it, so I think that's sort of what we're actually that's what we're actually going to see. And I think again it's going to be those that can actually do it versus those that can't do it, and it's those that really do say it and then walk the talk and ensure that it actually goes through. And again, that sort of digital transformation exercise. But it's also, I think, interesting that we'll also see it. I mean, you know, we go back to the good old days around sort of lean and TQM and all those kind of things, that it starts off being a special project, but then it gets embedded within the organization. And I think this is what we'll also start to see over the next 1 to 2 years, where this idea of being digital, it's in fact, we'll stop talking about it because it's actually just embedded in the way we actually operate today. Everyone comes together, they talk about the new projects, you know, we have the teams coming together and they discuss the data they want, they need, they're getting, how to actually use it, you know, what are the other ways we could actually play around with it. We're going to have those sandboxes, and that's just going to be the way we actually operate. So again, I think, you know, it's going to be another one of these initiatives that starts off on the special projects and then actually just gets embedded within the organization.
And just to add to that, I think that's important because as we started with the beginning of this conversation, that if you want to keep or attract and keep younger workers, you need to do this. This is the way that you need to be. You know, even before COVID, there was, you know, in 2019, I was talking to a technology company, and they had a thing called ghosting, where basically, you know, employees would rock up, they would see the green screen sitting in front of them on the production floor, and they go, "Wow, I'm working in 1994. No, thanks, I'm not interested," and they just don't turn up again, right? If you want to maintain, you know, a workforce that's going to be willing and interested in working for you and engaging in that way, then you're going to have to move with the times. One of the other things that organizations are having to face is that they do, in some cases, have a technology debt. Right. They are working with older technologies. There is that tendency to want to wring out the really last bit of investment from that technology. But the reality is that there are opportunities to start into something new that doesn't involve that heavy CapEx or what have you. And so moving on from those technologies, experimenting, starting those, getting the team. I was talking to another 3PL. They actually have their innovation center smack bang in the middle of the warehouse, so people can walk past at their lunchtime and get curious and play You know, so there are ways that we can embrace this that I think really can inspire people to get on with it as part of the digital culture, which was another point raised yesterday, but also just to be curious and interested in the work that they're doing every day.
Yeah. And sorry, can I just add on to that? Because I think one of the other things, and this is something that I think we miss out a bit as well, is that also as you start to go down this change and you start to introduce new technologies, you've actually got to market it internally and get people excited about it. And so you start putting out the newsletter, you start putting out the posters, you start putting out the excitement, you start doing the demonstrations, the videos. And I mean, one organization I was talking to, and it was the CIO, he said, I've become much more of a marketing person, marketing internally around the projects that are actually ongoing. But he was also talking about, as we start to use some of these newer technologies, you know, let's start with some really basic things, such as, you know, we have contactless payments in the canteen. We actually have facial recognition when we want to enter the plant. So people start to get used to using this new technology, the change, and they think, well, this is so much better. You know, I no longer have to get my wallet out and pay, et cetera, et cetera. And then we can then bring that into the operating environment. And so, again, you know, it's not just sort of one thing doing on the shop floor and separate everything else. We also need to think about that whole culture of change and actually just making it visible to everyone who's going to be involved in this.
Yeah, no, that's right. In fact, we come back again to the same old point of leadership, ownership, and engagement, communication, because, again, you know, not everybody's embracing change. Not everyone's running around embracing all the new technology. In fact, many times they use it as an excuse to moan about some problems. Are you following the comments? Some very interesting comments come from the audience. I really appreciate Brett's making some very interesting points. Mark just now made a couple of comments as well. So I think this resonates with many people. But what's interesting that Brett just highlighted also, that this could be an area where the fail fast concept may help in improving the scalability and how that evolves. It's great. Okay, so how do you both see 2022? I mean, obviously the challenges are still there. The final message in terms of how do we prepare ourselves for 2022? Is there any particular message other than what we already spoke about that is necessary, apart from the mindset change, the application, the focus? How can we apply what we've learned in the last couple of days into really in building that DNA into our resilience? Maybe I'll start with you, Chris, this time.
Yeah. And again, I was smiling as you were saying that, because I'm also thinking about my own team, and I'm telling everybody to try and get a rest.
Okay, that's a fair comment.
But whatever holiday, whether it be Christmas or Chinese New Year, whatever it might be, you know, when you've got some time off, do take a rest. Because I think
how long for? The question will be how long for, Chris? Not too long.
But seriously, I think next year is also going to be one where we're going to see a tremendous change again going on as well. I mean, you know, touch wood, we're going to be out of the COVID situation, but we don't know. So again, I think we've got to make sure that we're resilient. And coming back to the people part, Joe, you know, we need to be resilient, because if we're flat on our back, we're not going to be able to enact any of these changes. So again, we've got to ensure that we're going to be capable to make those decisions, you know, to do it in an intelligent manner. So, I mean, that's sort of probably a fairly simple one to look at. But, you know, as we start to look into that 2022, again, some of the, I think, you know, coming back to some of the technologies, I think we're going to start to see more and more of the technologies become mainstream. I mean, we talk about artificial intelligence, machine learning. I know Steph was running a panel on that earlier on, but more and more we're seeing those just embedded in the way we actually use applications. It's no longer a special thing; it's just built in. And I think keeping pace with these kind of changes is going to be key. And so it's going to be that need to be open mind and be able to act quickly. And coming back to the conversation we've had so many times, you know, just do it.
Yeah, you know, absolutely. The message is absolutely correct. We need to build personal resilience, and in doing that, we obviously have to learn and relearn and understand where the strengths are, where the weaknesses are, and reskill. That's excellent. Thank you. Last word to you, Steph. What are your parting words?
So for 2022, it's really going to be the year of automation. in my opinion. I think, information automation will probably be the first thing that people are going to look at. And I think to a certain degree, physical automation. We have had restrictions on workers and people are still dealing with that. I think that as we borders open up and we potentially even, I'm thinking about Singapore, we potentially even lose more workers. Organizations are going to be feeling that pinch. So automation is going to be a key, and we see that actually scaling. So when you're looking at automation to deal with whether it's chronic worker shortages or you want to be able to access offsite expertise or improve the velocity of information, that is obviously going to need to happen in order to speed up the integration of customer requirements with supplier, supply shortages, etc., and being able to bring those together. We've got this seesaw of supply demand, and if we're able to integrate that information a little bit better, but that's only going to happen if we're able to automate that capability.
Sure.
So short term is automation, midterm is integration, and then I think as we move out into 23, 24, we're going to start to see the impact of sustainability regulations starting to come into play, where we're going to have to improve, our information velocity so that we can ensure transparency, traceability, and visibility. So, yeah,
so
I took that a little bit further.
No, that's great. I mean, if we just summarize the short term, basically we have to adapt to a stronger resilience, personal resilience, and more automation. That's basically it. Then from there, we can start building and going to the next level of integration, smart technology, so on and so forth. So Dr. Christopher Holmes, Managing Director of IDC Insights Asia Pacific, Stephanie Krishna, Associate Vice President, IDC Insights Asia Pacific. Thank you so much for summarizing the two-day event. It's been really, really good. And the people are still on the call. I think we've got about 80 people on the call. Really, I think, have taken a lot away with them. Thank you very much for your time. Appreciate it. All the best in your work and in IDC's foresight in these things. Really appreciate being associated with you. And from all of us today, we thank everyone involved. I now hand over to the event chair lady, Steph, for the wrap up of the event. Thank you for everything and really appreciate it.
Yeah. So thank you everybody for attending. I'm not going to keep anybody much longer. I know we're right on the 1 o'clock mark, but I did just want to say, it's been a really fascinating couple of days. It was awesome to mix with people yesterday, and I think those that attended physically really enjoyed it. As we've dealt with the idea of disrupting ourselves, with the idea of embracing a digital first culture and looking at building in that flexibility, through agility, through visibility, through integration, there has been some really strong messages out there that does not exclude people, right? And people and process are probably the most important part of this. The technology is just a tool. And I think as we embrace that and as we, learn to use our tools better, then we will become better at managing our people and being able to reach everybody else who is in our supply chain. So thank you very much for your time. I want to say thanks again to Joe for chairing today. I really appreciate that. Thank you to the organizing committee, including Sanjay, Ramon, Bob. Thank you to all the team that have helped. Thanks to James, for all those that have dealt with James and getting in help. You've been invaluable champ. Good luck with your studies and really appreciate the effort that you've put in. Thank you again to all our sponsors. I named you all yesterday, but you are all very much valued, and LogiSYM is not possible without you. And also thanks to Constellar and ITAP for partnering with us. It's been a privilege to work with you, and we look forward to a continued engagement next year. If I've missed anyone, I do apologize. But again, thank you to everybody in your time. Thank you to everyone for your time. And I look forward to working with you in future LogiSYM events. So thank you.